Hello, I'm Pauline Thornhill. When the SS Florizel left St. John's Harbor on February 23, 1918, there was nothing to suggest that her run to Halifax and New York would be anything other than routine. The Florizel made her way through the Narrows and headed south to Cape Race, as she'd done so many times before. But the Florizel never made it to Cape Race, and this week on Land and Sea, producer Bob Wakeham brings you the story of her last fatal voyage. A story told in part by an eyewitness to the SS Florizel's destruction.
Nearly 85 years ago, on this very beach near Cappahayden on the southern shore, Paddy McCarthy witnessed one of the worst marine tragedies in Newfoundland history. McCarthy is 99 years old now, an incredibly spry and alert man whose lucid recollections of the 1918 Florizel disaster totally defy his age.
Well, boys, I looked at a sad looking sight, all right. She was hooked up on a rock, and there was a part of her, the stern of her, was underwater. It was only the bow part of her was up. Then, a scattered time you see the stern of her, the back of her, yeah. When the sea come in, the cover right over.
As a 15-year-old boy, McCarthy stood with a group of fishermen and watched in total horror and amazement at the dramatic sight of one of Newfoundland's most luxurious vessels, the Florizel, crushed against the rocks. A mere 700 feet away, many of its passengers already dead, the remainder clinging to life aboard what was left of the battered ship.
Oh, boy, we know now how miserable, because they had to be wet. The water was going over, and I was wondering they weren't all lost, you know. And here, they stayed there the whole day and all night, that night. I tell you, they suffered something. Now, you know, she's not very, we say she's not very wide, let her be 15 or 20 feet wide. I'd say if she had to go that much out further, she'd escape the rock. Or if she had to go on the inside, she'd run a pretty handy touch over, you get out of her. But here she went right on the friggin' rock.
How the Florizel ended up on that friggin' rock, as Paddy McCarthy describes it, is still very much a mystery. But what is known with clarity is that the Florizel has retained a unique place in Newfoundland history, partly because of the dramatic and tragic nature of its last trip, but also because the Florizel, long before that fatal February voyage, was already one of the best-known vessels of its day. Frank Galgay has written a number of books on Newfoundland marine disasters, including, of course, The Last Trip of the Florizel. And he notes that World War I and the seal fishery, two seemingly unconnected events, gave the Florizel its high profile during the early years of the 20th century.
The very cream of the crop, our youngest, brightest Newfoundlanders went to the front, went to England to fight for king and country. The Florizel made several trips to Europe to bring over the young Newfoundlanders. And of course they immortalized themselves on July the 1st, 1916 at the Battle of the Somme, of course, Beaumont Hamel. Not only that, the Florizel was very, very well known to all Newfoundlanders because it was actively involved in the sealing industry in Newfoundland. So there were literally thousands of people who went to the ice each spring. In 1910, of course, it had 49,000 pelts when it went to the front.
But when she wasn't sailing, the Florizel was a traveling choice largely for the well-off.
It was a classy boat. It had 4 decks, it had a stateroom, a saloon, very classy eating area, And I would say more than likely that you were either middle class or upper middle class who took advantage of the travel in those days. You were fairly well to do.
And so, on that Saturday night, February 23rd, 1918, it was not an impoverished group of passengers who were on board the Florizel as it steamed out to the St. John's Narrows. Even John Munn, the managing director of Boring Brothers Red Cross Line, the Florizel's owners, was on board. Munn and his daughter Betty were heading to New York to meet up with his wife.
It was a bad evening. It wasn't a very pleasant evening. And of course the forecast for the next day also predicted worse weather, slab ice, gale winds, and drifting of snow.
And ordinarily, would that be a cause for concern, or was the Florizel the kind of vessel that could handle that kind of weather?
According to the historians and the people of the day, that was fairly normal weather for a rugged coast like Newfoundland. And of course, Captain William Martin was a very experienced mariner, and this really didn't perturb him whatsoever.
But between that Saturday night departure and the early morning hours of Sunday, February 24th, the Florizel steamed off course, and the results were catastrophic.
I altered the course to west-southwest so as to go around Cape Race at 6. The wind was southeasterly and it was blowing a moderate gale. I knew that I had lots of room. Steering on like that, I would take the ship round the Cape 3 or 4 miles off. I reckoned that I had any amount of room to go around.
All of a sudden from the watch, a gentleman observes that there's slab ice. And he continues, of course, towards the slab ice. And this is the horrific thing about it. What he considered to be slab ice was not slab ice, but it was heavy breakers or waves rolling in, creating this terrific foam, white foam, which gave the impression that it was ice. And that's when the Florizel struck the rocks, Hornhead, and Cappahayden with a vengeance.
When the ship struck, I put her full astern and told the chief officer to send a message to Cape Race that the ship was aground. I gave orders to get the boats out. The purser who was near, I told to get all the passengers ready to leave the ship if necessary. I then saw the impossibility of launching the boats as the seas swept clean over the ship.
People were in their cabins, people were below different areas of the deck, people were rushing out in their nightgowns, their pajamas, because you must realize that this took place between 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when people were asleep. There was total confusion. As the spray came in, of course, it began to freeze, and people were coming down gangways and coming down in different areas of the ship, were just sliding off the ship into the churning waves and water that was around.
As the people on the Florizel struggled to survive, residents of nearby fishing communities, including Renew's, Paddy McCarthy's hometown, could hear the desperate and pleading sounds of the Florizel's whistle.
We got up a Sunday morning and went to Mass. And after we coming out of Mass, we heard tell about the Florizel being ashore in Cappahayden, but the Horn Hill, just above Cappahayden. Everybody had to go up to the rake shore. We drove up on the horse and slide, went over the ponds. All we could see is the Florizel and the water going over when the swells come in, you know. Should wash. Well, the stern part of her was underwater, clear of a scatter time when the swell would go out, you know, you see a bit of the stern. But all the bow of her, that was on the rock. But the sea used to wash right over that too, see. No one could do anything to help you. All you could do, here, everybody standing on the cliff and just looking out. That's all you could do. You couldn't get handy to it.
Because the water was so rough.
Oh, good Lord, yes. and you know, another thing, too deep there between the rock and where she was to land.
The fishermen couldn't get out because of the storm and because of the waves. They would lose their own lives, and it was impossible to get out there. However, to give some hope to those that were struggling for survival on the Florizel, they lit fires on the beach, and that, I would guess, was some form of hope that there were people on the beach that were ready and willing to be of assistance to them.
Well, that's all you do when you get light a fire. Well, let them know that there were people they were watching out from too. But you couldn't do nothing. You couldn't go think about getting out of boredom or anything. No, man. No. They're very, very rough, extra rough.